But I think if I get on the bus in Middle Heights, it's like not as packed.
Probably. Oh, no.
So I think I'll be okay. But I still have to walk like maybe 5-10 minutes to this old stuff.
By ATV.
I just need to buy
Did Twitter decide on a way to say that yet?
You need to get them now.
There was a meme
I need to get on
let's
that.
call it sushi or something.
Winter boots.
So what's the
Yeah.
this brand?
So now is there only one
I need
service?
suggestions.
And that's
Yeah.
here? Okay.
I have some boots, I have like leather boots, I guess they were just winter boots.
That's the point.
I kind of want some stylish.
This brand, it's like expensive, but it's like the most highly rated. Because we're all that.
I mean, I was expecting, I was prepared to like pay pretty good amount for boots.
I got these ones, but like the ones.
Everybody down south got the Tims.
On Friday and Saturday, it's only one
Okay, welcome to Weather Watch this week. We'll start off with just a brief review of the last week's weather, then we'll talk a little bit about some of the anticipated hazards over the next week or so, and then we'll get into current weather and look at to the short to medium range weather over us. So when we last were here, we can stop that for just a second. When we were last at Weather Watch last week, we had a satellite image that looked something like this. I guess it's pretty close to the current time, maybe it's an hour late, but this is roughly what we were looking at. We had Hurricane Larry in the North Atlantic, projected to track across parts of Newfoundland, near St. John's, and then end up just to on southeast Greenland and produce significant snowfall there. A lot of wind and rain for parts of maritime Canada. And we're looking at pretty decent weeks. And then the other feature that we were watching was this broad area of disturbed weather in the Western Caribbean and also in southern Bay of Campeche. It was expected to organize and produce a significant rain event and maybe a tropical cyclone over parts of Texas and Louisiana into early, this was again a week ago, into Monday, Tuesday of earlier this week, and then spread slowly into the central Gulf coastal states. So let's see what actually happened with that. So we'll advance a few frames. We'll first watch Larry as it tracks to the north-northeast. Pretty impressive storm crossed over maritime Canada, headed northward, and we'll watch it becoming an extratropical cyclone and become much more asymmetric in its circulation as it impacts eastern Greenland. And I think we had a lot of wind and perhaps some snow. I didn't look at the actual reports. I don't know if anyone saw actual reports on the forecast for 2 to 4 feet of snow from that system. I don't know what the final tally was. Anyone know on that?
I think that verified.
Okay. So that's some snow. And if John Martin were here, I'm sure he would be saying that, yes, we need those tropical cyclones to produce all that snow. Although he wouldn't say that. I'll put words into his mouth since he can't refute it.
If he's watching on the stream and he'll
Maybe he'll say so. Let's watch what happened down in the Western Caribbean in the Bay of Campeche as we animate. See the convection kind of flared up and weakened, and then we saw slowly as that feature moved across the Yucatan Peninsula. We'll stop it right there. It began to organize, and this is eventually what became Hurricane Nicholas. It was a really kind of a raggedy-looking storm and slowly moving, kind of drifting northward, just off the east coast of Mexico earlier this week. I always lose track of my days, so this is on the 13th. It should have been Tuesday, I believe. And then as it continued to develop, it became a minimal hurricane, 75-mile-an-hour winds, developing just offshore south of Houston as a hurricane, and finally made landfall in the north along the upper Texas coast. So we can keep stepping that forward a few clicks. And just watch as it kind of matures. It's got velocity in a fairly deep, impressive convection close to its center as it goes moving north-northwest, and finally making landfall roughly right about this time, again, as a minimal hurricane. And you can see a couple of interesting aspects of these hurricanes. In addition to this sort of, what was formerly a sort of a central, dense, overcast, really deep, impressive convection, is this broad anticyclonic outflow that's associated with it. And in hurricanes, you know, we think of the impact as being something that's local, right? Upper Texas coast, central, you know, the mid-Texas coast and the upper Texas coast with strong winds and heavy rain and all that, maybe a few tornadoes. But there's also an impact that these tropical cyclones can have on a much larger fraction of the globe that's associated with their outflow, right? So these storms, you have this circulation that swirls inward cyclonically, moves upward, and then eventually advances outward in a divergent but anticyclonic manner. And that outflow can spread over a pretty large region and can have an impact on the seasonal, the climate of a season, or certainly the short-term forecast impact in the medium range, but can also be sort of in some seasonal type timescales that can have a big impact depending on the size of that anticyclone that forms in the upper troposphere associated with the tropical cyclone. And there's some ideas that it might also make it more conducive for future tropical cyclones to develop, or depending on where that anticyclone sets up or where the next disturbance sets up, it could also hinder because of the shear on the periphery of this outflow that could lead to weakening of other nearby tropical systems. So these are kind of interesting beasts to look at. It's not just the low-level cyclonic circulation. That's obviously going to have the biggest impact to humans directly, but there's also an impact it has to the broader circulation of the tropics and subtropics, and sometimes mid-latitudes, depending on where the storm finally decays and where its outflow finally arrives at. So let's continue stepping this forward, studying and animate. We had some thunderstorms earlier in the week. In our latitudes, some showers, and then we had a nice frontal passage. This is nearing the end of this period. Pretty decent weather, and we see the next weather system beginning to set up to our west near the end of this loop, and this is going to be what gives us maybe a few showers later tonight, or later this afternoon, and then a pretty decent day tomorrow, and into the weekend with us warming up. So we're now getting to a period of time as we move into middle to late September when these frontal passages are going to become a bit more frequent and impactful for us. This one, we'll see a notable change in the dew points once this goes through. We'll do a little bit of an analysis of this front in a little bit. But we'll see one of the things is that the upward motion and the moisture are not quite in phase, so the chances of us getting much precipitation is not significant. Also on this map, we can see the sort of the last vestiges of the remnants of Nicholas, still over parts of Louisiana, still forecast to produce even today 2 to 4 inches, 2 to perhaps locally 4 inches of rain over parts of Louisiana. And an area of disturbed weather that's just off to the east-northeast of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. I think the center is somewhere here, that little lip right there you see in the IR imagery. And the deeper, higher convective cells are further towards northeast. So this is an area that the Weather Service believes, or the Hurricane Center believes, could develop into a tropical depression, which means it's a cyclonic revolving storm with winds of up to 35 knots, or it might get a little bit stronger with over 40 knot winds and become a tropical storm. So that's something that's being watched, but it's not expected to have significant impacts other than increased surf and swells along the east coast of the United States over the weekend. Okay, so let's quit out of this and take a quick look We'll come back to some satellite imagery in a little bit, but let's look at a quick look at the, looking the week ahead in terms of hazards over North America. And so this is a map put out by the CPC, the Climate Prediction Center, and it's looking at the sort of U.S. hazards, sort of, it's an outlook. And you can see a broad area where there's extreme drought, or severe drought, that's continued. And you can actually click on these and you'll see, if you're kind of confused which color is which. On the brown area right here, you can see the severe drought in this broad area. There actually are some places, like if we close that out in the blue, that blue, how do we get on top? Just the blue piece itself. Get a little of that. We have possibility of high winds along the front range or over the Rockies, and a couple places over the upper Midwest to our west. We close that out, where there's the potential for some heavy rain. See the green areas. Well, can't close it. Scroll down a little bit. Okay, there you go. Over parts of Minnesota and western Iowa, and then also in the southeastern part of the United States, just north of Atlanta, potential for some heavy rain. And they give a period. We're not going to go too deeply into this, but if you go to this page, you can also see a nice description. If you're curious, what are they looking at? What are the factors that are contributing to that? And they detail each of those hazards, and then some synoptic overview, summary of what's going on. But what's interesting, and it's unfortunate again, is that this drought persists over the western part of the United States, and there's no obvious relief in sight. Maybe those folks in Minnesota are going to get a bit of relief with this heavy rain, but there are trade-offs with the heavy rain. The ground is really dry. It's almost like cement. You get significant flooding because the world is runoff. But rainfall is going to be appreciated for sure in those areas, unless you're a farmer and you're concerned about agriculture beginning to harvest things at this time of the year. Okay, let's go to the next tab, please, Pete. And this is the short-term forecast for 6 to 10 days. And so if you're tired of the heat that we've had, it hasn't been too bad. Looks like a near normal period for 6 to 10 days, and that's basically highs in the upper 60s, low 70s, and staying dry. And again, even for the to our west, where it's been dry, it's like that drought is going to continue. The eastern part of the United States, where it's been really wet, it's like they'll still see some above normal, there's above normal likelihood of precipitation over the mid-Atlantic and the New England and New York State. So this is going to be that's the pattern for the next 6 to 10 days. We could go to 8 to 14, beyond that, and the warmth just returned, okay? But again, being above normal here, and the deepness of the red is not an indication of how much hotter it's going to be. It's just greater likelihood, greater certainty that it's going to be much warmer in this part of the country. For the southeast, remaining below normal, near normal to below normal, and with us likely being above, perhaps above normal. And then in terms of precipitation in the next 2 weeks, week 1 to week 2, below normal precipitation. So a dry, mild pattern continuing. So fall is really nice. And maybe this is good again for agricultural interest, but the question is, how much rainfall do we need to make up, particularly in this part of this, southern Wisconsin. Next tab, please. Okay, so here's the current radar, and you can see really nicely that swirl in northern Louisiana. This is the remnants of tropical depression, formerly Hurricane Nicholas, now tropical depression, just spinning around, still producing some hopefully heavy rainfall in the broader circulation. You can see rainfall moving into southeastern Louisiana, just south of New Orleans. Off the east coast of the United States, you see some showers that have developed with that disturbance that the Hurricane Center is watching, but again, not too menacing at this point. And closer to home, we see this band of precipitation that's advancing toward us, and also again, that's associated with a cold front that we're going to be analyzing in just a few moments. And you can see a few showers, maybe even thunderstorms, lining up ahead of that. In fact, to see if these are actually thunderstorms, can we go to the, this is a little bit off topic or off the tabs. Let's go to the lightning page. So we have access, it's only accessible for WISC.edu accounts here, but we do have access to lightning data, the National Lightning Detection Network. And so we can bring that up if you're curious where there are lightning strikes. He has a nice set of maps there. We'll do, this is an animation for the whole, we do for the Wisconsin area. So yeah, in eastern Iowa, you can see some recent lightning strikes. You can see that these advance as we go forward in time. They change their color. The newest strikes are the lighter ones. The older ones are the blue and green. So you can see some lightning strikes advancing toward the east, but south of our latitude. We go look at the national one just to get a broader sense of this. And a few of the remnants of Nicholas, a lot over the Gulf of Mexico, and a few out here over the Atlantic, well to the east of Cape Hatteras, with that system that's out there. So a pretty quiet day. This is not the most exciting weather watch day, but it'll be getting more exciting over time. So thanks, Pete. Next tab. Okay, just another view of this is the Mesoscale floater that's over this developing area that's just off the east coast, and east-northeast of Cape Hatteras. I guess the observed center is actually displaced from where this deep convection is, but you can really see nicely these locales streaming out beneath this big cirrus overcast over here. And you can see some of the cloud elements here moving toward the northeast, these moving off to the southwest, so there's certainly a trough, the wind shift at the surface. You can even see some small, really weak low-level vortices in the low cloud. But again, you can see the cloud edge right here where the deep convection is, and these elements emerging from beneath it. So not a very well-organized system, but something that the Hurricane Center says is likely to develop into a depression later today. They gave a 70% chance of that, but they seem pretty confident on that. Okay, let's go back to, I think the next tab I'm going to current U.S. view of the satellite. Let's go back to the satellite. Let's go 16, not the floater. So just work out. Go to that.
Yeah. What do you want?
Just the U.S., the North America goes 16 visible to us. And then we'll go to the, okay, this will work. So again, pretty obvious sort of structure to the clouds right here. Probably the most conspicuous thing down from the Midwest is this band of cloudiness, which again is associated with the front. We saw, there's some areas of convection of thunderstorm. Convection, but there's thunderstorms actually just in eastern Iowa. You can see some of the brighter cloud tops there. And this is again slowly advancing toward us, but it's not particularly well. Look at the radar. Look to the radar, we saw a little bit of rain to our west. Again, the developing disturbance here. And let's go to the Pacific. Take a quick look at that, because there's a big storm out there that will impact us early next week. We'll see the first stages of that. So this is a really nice developing trough in the central part of the Pacific. These cloud tops right here, this sort of modeled convection right here, these are cold, which we'll see when we look at the analysis of 5 millibars. I think there's minus 25-degree isotherm right here just south of Alaska. And pretty evident structure to this with this trough-like feature, this trough feature here in the cloudiness. And you'll see that'll be the geopotential as well. And those clouds and precipitation likely streaming into the Pacific Northwest. And we'll see that when we look at the short-term forecast. And you can see that this is the ITCZ, kind of active with convection, but no organized tropical weather system at this point showing up on this map. But the Pacific is beginning to get pretty active, and this is this is a classic structure you can see. What's called a baroclinic leaf cloud developing just in the northeastern Pacific. That's sort of a harbinger of a cyclone developing. And we'll see that this weather system will actually have an impact on us later in the week in dropping our temperatures from the 70s and low 80s back into the 60s for highs. So it should be pretty pleasant once that develops. Hope that's getting a little bit ahead of ourselves in the forecast. Let's go to the next tab, please. That'll be the surface map. We'll first zoom in over Wisconsin. And you can see last hour 75 over 58. 10 miles of visibility, a light southerly wind. Green Bay also 76 over 58, so pretty nice. Ahead of this front that's been analyzed here, you can also see a nice wind shift across this boundary that shows up with winds out of the west and northwest behind this front. And you can see the nice temperatures dropping off. Also note, as you go across this boundary that's indicated in blue, you'll see the pressure is decreasing, so you can see finally that pressure trough is decrease in this direction, then begin to increase as you move further to the southeast. 1,021.9, 1,018.2, 1,018.5, 1,019.8, so the trough is right in here, and that's consistent with the wind shift that we see there. And the dew points also drop off behind this front. The models were forecasting a surge in dew points into the low 60s, and maybe if you were to analyze this, you probably have a ton of very high dew points right ahead of this front. So it'll get moist for a few hours, and then it's going to come crashing back down into the 50s and get much more comfortable. Let's go down to Louisiana, see if we can see any evidence of the circulation of Nicholas. You can see the cyclone that's analyzed here at 1,014 hectopascal, and you can see, again, a very weak circulation here. I guess the Weather Prediction Center, WPC, is now tracking this because of the flooding potential, the heavy rains associated with it. And they indicated in their last report about an hour ago, or a couple hours ago, that it was like 15 knot winds, but I don't see anything over 10 in the vicinity of this. As the storm, this cyclone is finally needing to wind down. All right. And we'll go to the Pacific Northwest. I don't think there's much yet occurring here, but let's just double check. You can see the weather system we saw approaching the west coast of the United States. You can see a couple reports in southwestern British Columbia of moderate rain and light rain along the Washington coast as this cyclone, this weather system begins to approach, and a cool day with temperatures in the 50s. And again, any light rain here, any rain they get is going to be certainly welcome because it's going to may just put temporarily dampen things up, and they've been really dry and really hot over the summer. Okay, next tab, please. Sounding. Let's skip this because I can't recall where I was going to go with sounding. Actually, go back to the sounding page. We'll just go to the upper and have to go to your superheats first, please. And we'll start at 850 hectopascal. So on this map, it shows up nicely again in the geopotential minima over here over Louisiana, where the remnants of Nicholas are. But again, closer to home, you can see this broad southwesterly flow at 12Z this morning, green day. Winds out of the southwest at 35 knots at 850. Down in, forget my station here, in eastern Iowa, again, southwest at 20. And then as you go to the northwest, we get a wind shift at 850 hectopascal. You can also see these isotherms that are kind of lined up. So there, so cold advection leading just into the northwestern part of our state earlier this morning. And then leads westerly winds in the colder air there. You can see the cold advection sitting all the way back into the Dakotas. Obvious, very evident trough as well at 850 hectopascal in the geopotential light field associated with this. This is evidence of this front at this level a few hours earlier. And again, a nice minimum in geopotential back over Saskatchewan. And the cyclone that was out over the west coast of the United States, you can kind of see the broad swirl cyclonic circulation with cold advection just well south of Alaska this morning. Let's go to 500 hectopascal. At this level, you can see that trough axis is a little bit further to the west than we saw 850 hectopascal. Again, there's still a clear shift in the winds and a nice confluent flow ahead of this baroclinic zone that's forming, so there is a bit of a modest upper front that's developed to our, or was developing this morning to our northwest. Strong westerly flow over the northern Rockies, and a pocket of really chilly air. This is the minus 25 isotherm right here, where we saw that those convective clouds, those cumulonimbus clouds in the Pacific satellite imagery that we're looking at, those 17 satellite imagery we're looking at earlier. So, again, pretty active crowd. This nice, pretty impressive trough, and a really deep one that's, again, approaching the west coast of the United States. That'll be a big weather maker shortly. Let's go to 200 hectopascal, please. Again, if there are questions or some things people would like to see, please speak up. Fairly impressive jet to our west this morning, extending into just east of Hudson Bay, all the way from the Dakotas, Hudson Bay, and what do I want to say about this? This is consistent, its location is consistent with the diaphonicity we saw in the lower troposphere. So thermal wind balance will dictate these winds increasing with height in this region, associated with the diaphonicity that manifests at the front and the surface. Out of the Pacific, again, there's that really deep, impressive trough approaching the west coast. And again, if we look at this, the pattern of change in curvature of the different height contours, we might infer that there's going to be significant divergence approaching the west coast of the United States, and that's indeed where we saw some of the light precipitation already breaking out. That cloud head that we saw as well, in the so-called barometric leaf cloud, beginning to develop in this region as well. So pretty impressive trough, and we'll see what its evolution is going to be like as it moves into the western part of the United States. All right, so the next map we're going to look at is going to be from the GFS, and this is from the 6C run, since I looked at that earlier. I know it's about the same, maybe it'll be the same in the forecast. This is valid at 18Z. Remember that front was still to our west at this point. We're in Madison-Dade County. You can see the wind shift, right? Winds are northwest, becoming more westerly. So there is a bit of, you can see the pressure trough that shows up nicely here, as well as this wind shift. And this is modestly frontogenetic at this particular time, right? Strong component of winds normal to this baroclinic zone, and then the winds, that component kind of weakens a little bit. So this is a frontogenetic band that exists right along, through Iowa into southwestern Wisconsin. And so when you have such structures, when you can analyze such structures where you have frontogenesis, the packing together of these isotherms, that's going to be associated with a thermally direct circulation with warm air rising and cold air sinking right along this boundary. We're just ahead of it. So if we look at the next map, which will show the vertical motion at this point, there's this band of upward vertical motion, negative omega. I don't know where the scale was on this, but this is the vertical motion right here. That's right it's right in line with the front. So this is kind of a really nice example of frontogenesis occurring and the frontogenetic circulation. These minus values of omega, remember pressure in isobaric coordinates, vertical motion is going to be dp dt, right? And that's, if it's upward, it's going to be negative, so this is going to be consistent with that location in the front. We can just try to think of a way to align this so we can compare things. I'll keep the cursor, pointer right here. If you go back to the other map, we'll bring that map over to the same location so we can bring it down a little bit, that corner. Up a little bit more, right there, down a little bit. We can just flip back and forth between them. Okay, let's flip to the other one for a sec just to make sure it's aligned. Hopefully this works.
We'll know that I can do it.
Oh, okay, it's not going to work that well.
Let's do it just without full screen, so we'll go there.
Okay. Point is, here's this, okay, so this band of upward vertical motion, just out ahead of where we see the frontogenesis occurring, all right? And ahead of the front, so this is going to be this circulation that it's going to be along the front, again, on the warm side of it, rising air, subsidence behind it, and that shows it really nicely in this set of maps. So one of the questions is going to be, if we were to look at the surface precipitation rate, so go down to the kind of more traditional surface map that we look at on this, under surface precip, and then go down to precip type and rate. Look at this and say, well, okay, nice front, nice, fairly impressive vertical motion. What's going on here? Not much in the way of precipitation. There is some we see in the radar right now, so this is a forecast, this is not reality. And so it might be wetter than we expect, but why are the models not producing significant rainfall? And I think part of that's due to the fact that it's not super moist yet at this particular time. If we were to go to, scroll down a little bit, further down, there's thermodynamics, I guess, moisture. For moisture, let's go to 700 millibar relative humidity. On the leading edge of this boundary, These are relative humidities, the scales down here. The blues are getting up into the 90% range, 90% relative humidity range, because air is just not, I mean, you're already starting with dry air, you have this upward motion, the air particles are beginning to reach saturation as they rise, cool, and hopefully approaching condensation if you want precipitation, but they don't, it's just too dry, I guess is the bottom line here with this. We have favorable dynamics for ascent, but we don't have enough, it's insufficiently moist for us to get much in the way of precipitation. You see in the radar that there is actually some areas of precipitation and actually active thunderstorms occurring in eastern Iowa this morning, or this afternoon, around this time, just before this time. So it's not out of the question we're going to see a brief shower, but we're going to get anything particularly heavy, it seems unlikely with this particular setup. Let's go to the tropical tidbits page. This is a cross-section. This is from the 12Z run of the model, so it's a little bit different than the slightly later run. And this time that we're looking at, let's go back 6 hours, please, at the bottom. But it's kind of the same story, although the orientation, the cross-section is not in perhaps the most favorable region. In addition to some of the surface frontogenesis, that's what the pink contour shows. And also what's shown here are theta E contours, so this is measure, for those of you that are new to atmospheric science, this is going to be sort of a combination of both moisture and temperature, but you can see where the barotonicity is, this contrast to both moisture and temperature, maximized down here where we have the so-called front. Some weak weak frontogenesis near the surface, mid-level frontogenesis that's maximized here, and just, I would say, modest upward vertical motion in the vicinity of this front. So even the dynamics, at least in this more recent forecast, are somewhat weak. This shows the accumulated precipitation ending at this time near the center of the map. Again, not the most robust front. If you go ahead 12 hours, or whatever the next time is on this, frontogenesis begins to ramp up a bit. You can see the vertical motion just ahead of the front, but this isn't particularly impressive. The other thing you'll want to look at is, okay, you can use these diagnostics as the atmosphere unstable, and so you want to look at vertical gradients in this equivalent potential temperature with height, where we see minima in theta E, dz being less than 0. Those can be regions of what are called potential instability for the lift to layer. First of all, not much lift occurring, at least in the cross-section. Looking at this, here are some minima ahead of this front, out over, this would be over Indiana and Illinois, but this doesn't look particularly impressive. But Professor Rao and Tripoli, they may want to say something about this cross-section themselves. It doesn't look particularly exciting for convection, but not much on that. So let's go back to the tab before, and we'll just quickly take a look going forward on the forecast. So this is valid later this afternoon. This is the 12Z run of the GFS. You can see this front passes by kind of quietly with a few showers just south of us, at least forecast by the GFS. You can look at the NAM and see something perhaps very similar. And you can see cold convection beginning to overtake us. If we go look at the dew points, it's very interesting to look at here. You see a nice region of drier air, really low dew points in the 20s and 30s. That's going to be pleasant if it actually gets over us over the part of the weekend. If we step ahead, let's go to tomorrow morning, 24 hours in the forecast. Really nice, cool morning tomorrow with really low dew points in the low 50s, upper 40s, low 50s. Should be a pleasant time. If you look at the temperatures at this time in the forecast by the GFS, we'll just hover the cursor over here. Madison, upper 40s, not too tough to take. A pretty nice day tomorrow morning. If we go down back to the precip map, a couple things to focus on. Again, this big ridge over us, it's been moving eastward. Baroclinic zone as well to our south. Here's this cyclone developing in the North Atlantic with some heavy precipitation to its northeast. Again, this is just a pretty quiet pattern. And the weather system that was approaching the west coast, finally coming inland and bringing some at least in this forecast, fairly significant rain over coastal Oregon and Washington, and in fact, at higher elevations, even some snow. So I think some of the first snow we've seen on the maps in a while. Okay, let's go to 36 hours of the forecast. We had an impressive trough. The cyclone that was over Alberta has moved to the northwest, or northeast, from 996 down to 988. So fairly impressive cyclonic circulation, strong warm advection in advance of it. Obviously cold advection behind it, and the showers post-frontal over the Pacific Northwest. Again, any little bit of rain they can get is going to be appreciated. And for us, the anticyclone has moved into eastern Canada, and we're now in this weak warm advection phase, but dry. It's going to be a dry weekend, but certainly warmer Saturday afternoon and early evening. Let's go to the Sunday morning at 48 hours. So we can see a nice brisk geostrophic wind out of the south over us Sunday morning. The cyclone that was in Canada still just moving eastward. An impressive, really broad circulation, cyclonic circulation with warm advection all the way up into Assumption, Canada. Over us, the temperature advections are pretty weak, right? Because the thickness pattern is also fairly flat. There's not much of a gradient in thickness. Those of you in 310, we've been talking about advection. Yeah, we don't see much of advection here at all. All the advections further to the north where we have a thermal gradient. Again, this is just a quiet pattern. So we'll go ahead to 60 hours of the forecast Sunday evening. After getting probably up into the middle to upper 80s on Sunday. Still going to be dry most of the day on Sunday, but it'll begin to feel a little bit more moist, a little bit more muggy. If we go to the dew points, you'll see those they've increased significantly. Up right there. All that dry air that was over us earlier is now over Canada and New England. We're going to get dew points getting into the upper 50s and low 60s. Not a gross day, but it's not going to be as comfortable for us tomorrow. It will be tomorrow. All right, let's go ahead to Monday morning. And temperatures, by the way, at this point they're about 82 or so. They're a bit warmer if you go back 3 hours. You'll just see the upper 80s, maybe close to 90. Interesting thing about last weekend, we were talking about the potential for us getting the 90. Last Weather Watch, we were talking about this on Sunday, and we only got to about 84, 85. It wasn't, didn't get quite as warm as was expected. I think part of that was we had cloud cover. I remember Greg mentioning something about, well, if you do all the mixing, I was talking about mixing and take the 850 temperature, bring it down to the surface, what will be true under perfect conditions, ideal sunshine earlier in the year when you have a longer day. We didn't get the ideal conditions because of cloud covers that kept us cool. And it'll be interesting to see how we verify on this on Sunday. A lot of the other models are actually much cooler than 90 degrees for Sunday for us. Okay, thanks, Pete. And we'll go to 72 hours. Monday and Sunday night into Monday. Early Monday morning, a few showers beginning to approach as this next weather system approaches. A much more impressive front. Again, as we get into later September, these fronts are going to get more impressive. You can see the thickness gradient behind this is a bit more impressive than we'd seen earlier. And in fact, again, some places in northwestern Colorado and Wyoming, the highest peaks, perhaps beginning to see some of their first snowfall of the season. And we'll just watch the timing of this frontal passage Sunday into Monday. Let's go to 84 hours. So this model is forecasting a line of thunderstorms, or just isolated thunderstorms ahead of this front as it begins to approach us on Monday afternoon, late Monday afternoon, early Monday evening. Let's go ahead to Tuesday morning, 96 hours. This front's out of here. Finally. So just southeastern Wisconsin still getting rainfall, but a northwest wind, cold advection. Again, this is going to be the ushering in some really nice fall weather following the passage of this particular weather system. All the way up into Canada, again, showers and thunderstorms, but for us, the front is clearly out of the area, and we're going to begin to dry out. Let's look at the dew points behind this. Okay, so it'll be a market change in the dew points. Prior to the front, we could get dew points going up into the mid-60s, and then we could crash this back into the 40s, and then even perhaps lower over time. So let's go ahead to the afternoon of Tuesday afternoon, or late Tuesday afternoon, early evening. Dew points getting into the just around 40 degrees. So as we're thinking about, you know, if you're interested in what's a quick forecast, one of the things to look at is if we get light winds overnight, clear skies, you know, the dew point is going to conserve, you know, the dew point in the late evening could at least give you some indication, or if you know if the dew point is going to be forecast for the next morning, you can actually look at that as well. But if we go ahead to Thursday morning, 38 or so for this point.
Wednesday morning, right?
Or Wednesday morning, sorry, Wednesday morning. 39 degrees, 38 degrees. Under ideal conditions, we have light winds, clear skies. You know, we could say with maybe a degree of confidence, no pun intended, degree, that we're not going to see temperatures obviously lower than the dew point, but this will probably put us into the mid-40s perhaps for a low, if not lower than that. Let's check out temperatures. I don't think we're going to quite get to, yeah. Okay, so that's about 44, so 43, 44. It's going to be that's going to be a pretty chilly morning on Wednesday morning when we get up. And then during the day Wednesday, if we go ahead to hour 129, 21Z, only warming up to about 66, so a pretty nice day coming up. Looking back at the surface map, again, large anticyclone over us, and the front moving towards the west coast. But, you know, it's going to be a somewhat abbreviated weather watch, but again, just pretty quiet period overall. If you just step ahead very quickly, 144 hours, just getting to Thursday morning. There's a nice cyclone over us. Again, light winds will be pretty cool. Thursday morning, but a Friday morning for next week, for our next weather watch. Warm advection returns, at least briefly, as we have a weather system well up into Canada, but you can see the surface trough that's being dragged off the Rockies with the earlier westerly flow. You can see the nice surface trough, warm thickness ridge going by. That weather system goes by again. You go ahead for the following 24-hour period. Things are getting pretty active as we have these cyclones, you know, going across the northern part of the United States for this time period. Last thing I want to point out is we were looking at some development in the Bahamas. If you recall, at the end of last weather watch, that was an extreme part of the forecast. That, at least in the last several auto runs, doesn't even exist. There is a cyclone that's forecast by the Hurricane Center to develop near the Lesser Antilles and move into the central and almost western Atlantic, but then stay well offshore. So that we need to get to this set of maps. We can go ahead a few more clicks, just days at a time. See the evolution of the flow over us. You can see every few days we're going to get some sort of frontal passage. Cyclone goes back, cold advection, warm advection, cold advection. But this is getting, you know, as the westerlies begin to ramp up, we're going to get rapid changes to our weather. And finally, as we get to near the end of the month, early October, it's pretty chilly. Broad cyclonic circulation over us in this forecast. I wouldn't take this for granted. The total precip over this time period, not particularly wet. I mean, over the course of this is a 2-week forecast, over 2 weeks, only 1.25 inches, I'd say 1 to 1.5 inches of liquid precipitation over us. Not super wet. Greg, go ahead. Greg.
Yeah, I think there's a couple interesting things I noticed that are happening right now. One thing is I noticed the Bureau of Meteorology in Australia has put us on a La Nina watch.
Okay.
And for the first time in about, maybe it's over a year, it seems to be flipping over to La Nina. And they have some evidence of quite cold temperatures forming, at least in the models in the Pacific right now, in the tropical Pacific. So that has some implications for what our winter's going to be like. The second thing I want to point out is the Atlantic has mostly shut down for the Cape Verde season and hurricanes. So what's happened there? And I think we probably could go over and look. If we look at the tropical Atlantic on this, I think what's happening
Tropical,
Tropical and then Atlantic, and right there.
East Atlantic. Yep.
If you could look at relative humidity at, or humidity at about,
Down, here,
700 millibars.
moisture. That's pretty dry.
Yeah, so there's some very dry air off the coast of Africa, which is a Saharan air layer. It actually seems to be coming from North Africa and swirling down. And I think it's been dominating the Atlantic, and you can see it's pushing quite to the east. And this brings with it not only very low humidity, which means the way a tropical cyclone is trying to develop, but it also brings wind shear. Because structurally, these layers dynamically have some wind shear associated with them because of their tonicity. So I think that's, for at least temporarily, shutting down the Atlantic hurricane season right now. I think that's having ramifications for us in that, since we don't have a lot of moisture propagating northward from tropical storms entering the eastern Atlantic, I think that's helping to keep us a little drier, maybe. Or it could be, I also noticed there's been a persistent Walker circulation, which has had the Western Hemisphere mostly in subsidence for about the last week or more. And I think that's also helping keep our humidities low. So I think what's going on in the tropical Atlantic right now is actually quite anomalous. We get these Saharan air layers forming occasionally. This one is forming right during our hurricane season, so I think that's having some implications.
Okay, so, question about that, we can go to this tab right here. So while the Cape Verde season might be shutting down, it doesn't mean that, once it shuts down, there's a couple more disturbances left here. But once it gets shut down, then all the focus then returns to the Western Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico.
Which is where it's been in the last week.
Right. But I thought there was a sense that, about a week ago, or maybe just after Weather Watch last week, late last weekend, and I sent you that image of all these waves kind of lined up off the, over across Africa, expected to, they were heading eastward, or westward, excuse me.
They go to the Atlantic and they die.
So they get there and they just die out because of the dry air.
Yeah.
That's forecast to be over there. So that's going to be kind of unfortunate. Well, depends on what you like weather-wise. You want some sunny weather. You want to see these develop. But that's going to be interesting to watch. But even if the Cape Verde season dies, again, classically, climatologically, the favored regions then begin to cluster when you get into October, November, out over the Western Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. As Greg pointed out, we did have a couple in the last week over there. So it's not all over, but maybe those storms that track across the Atlantic are going to be fewer and further between, if not just totally done with. For this
The big question also is, can we cut into the Walker circulation enough to get periods of upward motion in the Western Hemisphere? It doesn't seem so dominant at this point, but as a La Nina develops, it gets stronger. So that southern oscillation could even shut the Caribbean down. I don't think we're going to get into the Greek alphabet this year, the way it looks. Let's put it that way.
Well, we're in the Greek alphabet in another area, but that's a more unfortunate story.
They're not using Greek names anymore, are they? Did they get rid of those?
But, yeah, I think.
Is there like bonus names or like a second set?
Oh, is that what they're doing?
I think, because last year they used so many of them up, I think they just gave up on using the Greek letters.
Maybe next week you might want to, if you want to go to your meteorology page and say a little bit about the perhaps upcoming La Nina. But that has implications for the circulation hemisphere, the whole hemisphere, right?
Yeah.
In terms of the weather.
It would have an implication of a more extreme normal winter for us, right? That's what La Nina does. It's kind of like a normal situation, but it also would imply that the West Coast is going to have to deal with a lot of drought. Because it's normal for the West Coast to not give much rain, and La Nina makes it even more so. So the West Coast, in order to recover from this drought, they really want to see El Nino, which is the opposite.
You get frequent, modestly low latitude storms hitting the West Coast frequently during those El Nino years that keep it wet with lots of flooding.
This is bad news for the West Coast.
Any other items or things that folks would like to look at? Severe weather threat, I think, for the week coming up is, or at least the next few days, looks relatively low from SPC. We can go just quickly look at that, but not much expected. Maybe along this front, that'll show up nicely. It lights up nicely at their page, but not this one.
It keeps filling in what it thinks it wants.
So this is the next day, their day one outlook. Again, broad area, just general thunderstorms over the southeast United States, and then a marginal risk. Central Kansas down in the north of Midland. Again, quiet times. And I think day two, or this is answer, or next day two, day three, and that's for the next weather system that's going to move for cool assault early next week. What's up? Quiet in the tropics, quiet in the latitudes, quiet in terms of severe, relatively quiet in terms of severe weather. That's probably a good thing for a while. I think it looks like next week will be a pretty active week, midweek with that strong frontal passage, and the cooler weather we get, it's quiet again. So, that's it for Weather Watch today. A little bit early for an end, but have a wonderful weekend, stay well, and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll do that.